New projections for the USDA report and the discussion about the market impact of the weather in South America. Jerry Gidel is ready to assess all of that and more right here on Connected Farmer, your channel to keep you up to date with the latest trends in agriculture and livestock. So, Jerry, we have had a week that has been very slow, but the market has reacted on Friday with 18 cents up for soybeans. And I think this reaction is related to the weather in South America, especially in Argentina. Do you agree with that?
No, I think you're exactly right that as we go through the month of January here, and we are approaching a third of the way through and could easily be half done here by the next week, in that the realization that there hasn't been a lot of moisture in uh, excuse me, La Pampas and also much of Buenos Aires and even parts of Cordoba and Santa Fe have been tinged a little bit. And that because there was a lot of optimism here about after the Russians were a big buyer of Argentina crops here this last spring to counter buying them from the U.S. And that there was even some talk that we are going to expand corn plantings and be able to get the number up in the 57 to maybe even 60. I heard a 60 million metric ton estimate out floating around here 2 months ago. And that doesn't look like the case because one thing is in Argentina, you have a certain amount of stuff that is planted before they have their wheat harvest, and they had a great wheat harvest, no doubt about it. But since that's to some extent delayed some of the plantings, and now there hasn't really been a tremendous amount of rainfall after the wheat harvest, and so I think a lot of people are saying, maybe I'll wait a little bit longer to see if I get some rain before I put some corn and soybeans in the ground, and I think that's a factor that's going to shave some of the wild optimism we had here, geez, a month ago, maybe 6 weeks ago on Argentina's output.
Yeah. Last week, you had mentioned possible, also a possible adjustment on the U.S. corn crop by the report, the upcoming report. But before that, I think since we mentioned Argentina, we can discuss still the demand coming from China. I think the market has stopped talking a little about that, but it's still very important.
Oh, it is important with Argentina, and that the one interesting thing is I think that the Chinese really swept a lot of their old crop supplies out, and now is actually out of the country. So I think that's also making the Argentine markets and also the Argentine producer out there a little nervous that there isn't that all of a sudden that their exports for the coming year could get shrink down quite dramatically if we don't get some rain here, relatively speaking. Now, there's been a forecast of that coming along here on a timely basis here, but it really hasn't fell where it really is needed. There's been some rains around in particularly the northern parts of Argentina and on into areas of Brazil, but the two driest areas that we've previously mentioned have, and they use, interestingly enough, are where you have the chance for a big expanded supplies after wheat in Buenos Aires and Pampas about getting corn or soybeans in. And so far, I think a lot of people have slowed down their enthusiasm about planting some dramatically additional acres after the wheat.
Yes, so we can talk about the report now. So you mentioned an adjustment in the U.S. crop last week. What else are you anticipating now?
Well, I think in general, we've mentioned last week that there hasn't been the real expansion of supplies on the ground out there, particularly in my trip across northern Illinois and in and central Iowa there on Highway 30, and that. And so that's, I think, is starting to get there. Actually, I was a little surprised the average here from Reuters is looking for 2 bushel down at 184. They were only kind of hinting around maybe a bushel, maybe two, but really, so it looks like there's other people feeling the same way. I'm still a bushel further down at 182.9. From there, uh, the trade's looking for a slight decline in harvested acres. I didn't use that approach, so in reality, the total bushels that I'm looking for are around 280 million down, while the trade is looking for about 200 million down. In general, that would be an interesting factor in here. Last year, as I mentioned in the past, is we had a 3.8 bushel decline, and I was looking for a 3.1. So from there, corn is, I think, is going to be the first one people are going to watch here on the U.S. numbers, and that both on the carryover stock and also on these production numbers. Beans, uh, that's really been a tricky one. We this has with this interesting unofficial shutdown in uh, U.S. government and also just the trade in general about our crop sizes back in October all the way through the first 10 or at least 5 to 7 days of November. It really kind of some of the commentary that usually comes up on the wire services was pretty quiet this year. I'm still looking for a 7/10 of a bushel down at 52.3. The trade average is down just 3/10 at 52.7. Uh, from there, and the trade average guess on production is down to about 24, 25 million bushels. I'm looking at that number being closer to 55 million and that. And beans are always an interesting one. To some extent, the moisture content situation can be a big factor. I think there was some pretty dry beans harvested, which will at the elevator actually turn into a smaller bushels out there. But in general, I think you're exactly right. What's going on in South America, and particularly Argentina, on impacts of both corn and soybeans will also have some impacts on prices versus the USDA's final production numbers that we just went over.
Yeah, so what do you think is going to be the market effect if those your estimates are confirmed?
Well, I think that there will be a little bit of recovery going on with those numbers there, and particularly if I think the things we've been picking up here about Argentina and that will have a little more dramatic impact at this point. I think today's reaction, the weekend and the frost report on Monday and things like that, we did end up having a hit some stops and had some emotional reactions there in the beans and corn even pushed up a little bit through the downtrend lines on some of these things. From there, the markets will also be watching closely what might be going on in, of course, on the ending stocks and seeing how they match up and things like that. We've had such a aggressive push here in U.S. wheat exports, and that we might see that number tighten up a little on stocks on a quarterly basis, and that which will be watched closely on both wheat feeding and corn feeding too. My 1.85 carryover, or excuse me, ending stock estimate is really kind of based upon a pretty aggressive feed demand. I wouldn't say that looking at our livestock numbers that there's anything huge going on there. Actually, if anything, we're not placing the number of cattle in the feed yards in the U.S. because of Well, the current administration wants to import beef from Argentina and Australia, and that so they're deciding, well, we won't. We'll keep our cattle on the grass, and what that does mean, though, that they will probably feed them to higher weights, and the inefficiency of feed yards, once you get past a certain level of weight in cattle, you start to have less efficiency of putting on those last pounds. And so, kind of a twist there in the logic of we might not have as many cattle in the feed yards, but we're probably going to feed them to higher weights, which could end up being similar to right now. At least the USDA's got a pretty aggressive feed number. I That's the one number that in the feed demand scenario probably is a little suspect. I think that could slide it down, and that's part of the reason why. Uh, this fall number on quarterly stocks might be lower than the trade, but at the end of the year, it could be a little less because we're not putting the number of animals in the feed yards from there. The wheat side of things we haven't talked about a lot in the last couple of weeks here. We had such a good crop there, as we mentioned, in Argentina. U.S. Uh, I don't know, different opinions about how much wheat was planted. And the one thing about wheat is that they can throw out some seeds out there and say they planted it, but when it's all said and done, the prospects of it really coming through here with a great yield, or even turns out that they might graze it out and that kind of stuff if from the point of view of looking at cheaper feed sources and things like that. But I do think that some of our export numbers are maybe a little stronger. Well, they're really strong versus last year, and I kind of feel like that maybe they'll take 20 or add 20 million to U.S. exports on wheat. Wheat, interestingly enough, is probably more of a follower at this point in time. The statistics on wheat worldwide, because of the expansion in Argentina and Australia, reasonable crops in other parts of the world, Canada, and even the US is there. So it's not going to be the leader. It sometimes is. It's most likely will be a follower. So that's something to keep in mind. But you never know. Sometimes things kind of get crazy. Last time the markets really were looking at South America, and we did have some different statistics there of slight increases in Brazil's production versus unchanged type situations, which really is what I'm anticipating from Argentina, and I think the trade is too. But maybe we'll get some reaction from the USDA getting a little more panicky
Yeah,
about what's going
so
on.
to finalize, what crop do you think will lead the upside?
I really think it's probably going to be corn, because I think that the crop size of corn is going to be down. The one thing that we got to keep in mind, last year we had a big turnaround here and we had 3.7 or 8 bushel decline, and we had a pretty good rally started and kept it going all the way into well, actually it was into April and May, and then we had a back off because the crop got planted. But I think it's still going to be the corn market is going to be that. Beans, maybe. I just, unfortunately, with our carryover stock in the U.S. at 300 million, I think it's going to be down maybe 20, 25 million. And that you don't get much firepower out of soybeans unless they're closer to 200 to 210 or something like that. The image at least of being under 250, and I'm not sure we're going to see that from the USDA. But that's something to keep in mind on things as we go into Monday's scenario. As I said, I think it's corn's the first one that's going to potentially provide this spark, maybe because of some surprising lower yields and maybe some stronger export and feed numbers here. Ethanol is coming along well, but it's not going crazy at this point. The one thing it has been going crazy has been the soybean crush, but unfortunately the exports have been very poor because of our friends in China deciding to buy every place else but the US until the last 6 or 8 weeks.
All right. Thank you very much.
We'll have a fun time looking at the numbers on Monday. Take care.